This week, a group of marijuana activists filed to have an initiative placed on the 2010 ballot that would legalize marijuana in the state. Marijuana use for medical purposes has been legal in California since 1996, following the passage of Prop 215. But the increase in the number of medical marijuana dispensaries in California's cities is worrying some officials. Joining us to talk about this developing story is KPBS health reporter Tom Fudge. And welcome to the show, Tom. Glad you could be with us.
Good to be here.
All right, so some local officials are reporting an increase in medical marijuana dispensaries right here. Why is that happening?
Well, the primary reason, I would say, is that in February, about 5 months ago, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder made a very dramatic statement when he said that the U.S. Justice Department was no longer going to go after and arrest providers of marijuana who were within state law. In other words, California and a few other states allow medical use of marijuana, and the Attorney General said, we're not going to prosecute those people if they're producing marijuana for medical uses. And as a result of that, some local lawyers started getting a lot of calls from people who said, how do I set up a marijuana dispensary? And right now there's an estimated 60 medical marijuana dispensaries in the city of San Diego.
What are the operating guidelines for these dispensaries? How does that work?
Well, that's very complicated because when Prop 215 was passed, there were very few operating guidelines. They essentially said you could use medical marijuana, you could cultivate it, but they didn't really say whether it could be sold, what kind of an organization would be able to produce it. And so as a result of that, there's been some additional legislation. There have been some state attorney general guidelines, which essentially say that if you want to produce and give out medical marijuana, you have to have a cooperative arrangement, and the medical marijuana can only be given to people within that cooperative. Sales to people outside of that cooperative are still illegal based on state law.
So actually the law may be unclear, but there is some law on this. And which is interesting to hear, because some cities like Chula Vista and National City, they have now put moratorium on new dispensaries.
Yes, they have. They've essentially said, time out. This is happening very fast since the Eric Holder comments, and they want to make sure they understand the law and the rules, and they want to make sure that they create dispensaries that are not going to be nuisances in their communities.
Then there's an assumption that medical marijuana works.
Well, it's a fact based on some pretty extensive studies that have been, some of which have been done here at UC San Diego, studying pain in AIDS patients, pain and cramping, what they call spasticity in people with multiple sclerosis. But those studies have been very limited. At the same time, some medical marijuana dispensaries have told potential clients, oh, well, if you have a sore neck, use marijuana. If you've got stress, use marijuana. If you've got asthma, marijuana might help. And those are claims that are being made really with no proof that I know of.
There was always concern among people, proponents, opponents of medical marijuana. This would open the door for legalization of marijuana. And now, indeed, there's a ballot measure that's being prepared to legalize marijuana. Periodically, this comes up. What's the reasoning behind legalizing it?
Well, the reasoning, people who support legalization of marijuana say that there is so much violence from the drug cartels that's associated with the sale of marijuana. If we legalize it, maybe that will go away. Now, critics say that's not true. But proponents say that it'll reduce violence, and also the state would be able to tax the sales of marijuana and make a lot of money that would go to our very beaten budget. Now, the only problem with legalizing marijuana in the state of California based on state law is marijuana sales are still illegal based on federal law. And even though Eric Holder has said, well, if it's medical marijuana, we will leave that alone. You can go ahead and do that. I'm not sure the Attorney General would say the same thing if marijuana is legalized in California for all uses, including recreational use.
What about our California voters? I mean, do we have any polls that indicate how they feel about legalizing marijuana?
Well, polls seem to indicate there was a recent field poll, and field poll is a very prestigious poll in California. A field poll said that more than 50% of people polled said that they would favor legalization of marijuana. Now, I think we know from other experiences that it's one thing to get more than half of people in a poll to say yes. It's a different thing to get more than half of people in an election to say yes. And so just because the field poll says, 53% of people are in favor of legalization, doesn't mean it's going to happen in the election.
And what we'll have to see is whether they get enough signatures on the initiative in order to the petition. But at that point, I'm going to have to say thank you very much, Tom Fudge.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being with me.